So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming, for attending this very, very anticipated Zoom meeting. Yes, thank you, Sister Bernadette, for making this Zoom meeting possible, this forum about the divorce bill. So yeah, before anything else, I'd like to call on Kuya. By the way, my name is Ruby Ramores.
And I'm Ted Ramores.
Ted Ramores.
We'll be playing host and the MC
Moderator
for this forum, Trusting Church Wisdom on Marriages.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'd like to call on Kuya Demi Chavez, our FLC Diocesan Coordinator, to give us of the family and life of the Diocese of Novaliches, to give us the opening prayer and Bible reading. Kuya Demi.
Yes, thank you, Ate Ruby, Kuya Ted. Good afternoon to all of you, fellow family and life advocates and members of the Super Coalition Against Divorce. To begin our special event this afternoon, let us offer ourselves in total humility to God and let us entrust our important activity at this time to Him for His honor and glory as we reverently honor His holy presence and proclaim His holy name as we say in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty and ever-loving, ever-living God, we beseech you, O Lord, to bless our important forum, marriage and divorce this afternoon. We praise and we thank you for arranging our schedules and for putting order into our lives so that we can actively participate in this crucial issue that will greatly impact our marital and family life. Immensely, we thank you for sending forth your special messenger, clothed with your divine inspiration and clerical wisdom, to enlighten us in this crucial topic. Abundantly bless him with the gifts of the Holy Spirit in order for him to deliver your message with deep conviction and moral fortitude. May you bless all of us, O God, with a listening mind and an intelligent heart, so that we can fully understand your message, which you have intended for him to deliver to us this afternoon. As we celebrate today the feast of Saint Lawrence, deacon and martyr of our faith, may we follow his example by remaining steadfast in our conviction to promote and defend the sanctity of marriage, the beauty of the family as an institution, and the dignity of human life, even if it means to sacrifice our own lives. And may the spirit of the Holy Family of Nazareth, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, guide and strengthen all of us in our mission to uphold and defend marriage, family, and life. Amen. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, now and without end. Amen.
For our gospel reflection, a reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to
Glory to
you.
you, O Lord.
Jesus raised his eyes to heaven and said, Holy Father, I pray not only for this, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, so that they may all be one, as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. And I have given them the glory you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one, I and them, and you and me, that they may be brought to perfection as one, that the world may know that you sent me, and that you love them even as you loved me. The Gospel of the Lord. Thank you, Ate Ruby. Kuya Ted.
Thank you very much, Kuya Demi. Everyone, at this point, I'd like to call on Kuya Wayne Elizar, who is our Family and Life Commission Diocesan Director for the Diocese of Novaliches. Kuya Wayne,
To welcome us all.
to welcome us all.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to our moderators, Kuya Ted and Ate Ruby Ramores. Again, let me remind everyone to please mute your microphones so that we can beautifully hear the messages for this afternoon. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone in this beautiful afternoon as we anticipate to listen and be graced with a good number of messages coming from God that may be shared with us with a beautiful, coming from a beautiful priest himself, Father Jaime Achacoso, JCD. So Father Jim, as he's fondly called, I'm sure doesn't need to be introduced for a lot of us for his credential and his being a Catholic priest. So we are really indeed in a good position this afternoon to receive a good number of knowledge and experiences that will be shared with us. So we thank all um, the people and the team that had made possible this event this afternoon. Again, we may look back to the time that we formally announced our formal opposition to this push for the legalization of divorce in the country, in our country, the Philippines, last June 18. And indeed, it is fitting to continue our message that we are not just simply airing our opposition, but we provide alternatives. And this session this afternoon will give us that there are indeed options on how marriages that are not meant to be can be treated, and how these are processed in the way that the church believes it has to be processed. So again, I welcome everyone, not only the members of the coalition, the Super Coalition Against Divorce, but also all our stakeholders that are here this afternoon. Our moderator just mentioned earlier the presence of Tina Monson Palma. And of course, we thank you, Mom, for gracing this affair. Indeed, it becomes more valuable for us to be here with your presence and all the other distinguished guests that are here with us this afternoon. Of course, I cannot mention you all, but I'd like to say that the Lord has meant us to be around so that we continue to represent the Lord that makes marriages that meaningful in the world, to tell the whole world that we continue to practice what had been preached by Jesus Christ himself in this world, in our timeline. Maraming salamat for your presence, and let's again continue to be inspired with what we will be hearing this afternoon. Magandang hapon sa ating lahat, and back to you, Kuya Ted and Ate Ruby.
Maraming salamat, Kuya Wayne, our Day Director of the Family Life Commission, Diocese of Navariches. At this juncture, we will have the introduction of our resource person to be made by our member of President of the Josefa, Sister Bernadette Abrera. Thank you, Ma'am. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to all the members of the Super Coalition Against Divorce. We are very thankful, of course, to our speaker, who immediately conveyed his interest to get in touch with this group when he learned about its existence. Father Jaime Blanco Achacoso is popularly and fondly called Father Jim. He was born in Quezon City. He studied at the Philippine Science High School. He graduated in 1970, and then for college, he went to UP Diliman. He took up a degree in the Bachelor of Science in Chemistry at UP Diliman. He graduated in 1975. He took the 5th place in the board exams for chemists in that same year. So he went on to teach chemistry in UP, but then he had a different vocational calling. So he took his studies in philosophy, and after after his philosophy studies, he went to Rome to the sacred theology for sacred theology at the Roman College of the Holy Cross. And then from Rome, he went to the University of Navarre in Spain, where he studied canon law. So he obtained a doctorate, both ecclesiastical and civil, in canon law. So that is what the JCD stands for. He is a doctor in canon law. And he finished in the University of Navarre in 1985 with the highest honors, sobresaliente, summa cum laude. And he was given the Premio Extraordinario for Best Doctoral Dissertation in Canon Law on the year that he graduated. He was ordained a priest in 1983 in Madrid, and he is incardinated to the prelature of Opus Dei, where he has carried out an intensive pastoral work. He had been assigned to Spain and Hong Kong, and he has been in Metro Manila doing apostolic work since 1987. He is a professor of canon law and general ethics, and he writes regularly on canon law matters for the CBCP Monitor and the Philippine Canonical Forum, of which he is the current editor. He has been the secretary of the Canon Law Society of the Philippines since 2001. And he was a founding member and treasurer of the Philippine College of Jurisconsults since 2015. He is a consultor of the Episcopal Commission on Canon Law and an ecclesiastical judge of the Tribunal of the Diocese of Cubao. So he is a promoter of justice of the prelature of Opus Dei for the regions of the Philippines, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Japan. So friends, we are very honored to have in our midst Father Jim Achacoso.
The title of this talk is Facing the Specter of Divorce, because that's all the very name of this group is a super coalition against divorce. It's super coalition against divorce. And that's really what we should be doing. That unfortunately, when the divorce bill was passed by a very narrow margin in the House of Representatives, now it's been transmitted to the Senate, it was because I tend to think more than anything else, the lack of credible opposition. Because I have friends in Congress, and they were telling me that the Speaker of the House, to his credit, because he's a good Catholic, he comes from a good Catholic family, his mother goes to church every day, and he himself goes even during the week, tried to delay that bill. I think he succeeded to delay it for 20 days, expecting help from the church, from the bishops, from the pulpit, but it didn't come, apparently. Not the way that would have made any difference in Congress. So there was quiet in the Western Front during those days. They were desperately waiting for reinforcements. And it was only the day before the voting that things started moving. I suppose, as far as the church workers were concerned, it was a a panic move to mobilize forces, to demonstrate there, to show numbers, etc. Too little, too late. And so it was passed. And for those of you who know how Congress works, there's a lot of horse trading that happens in those votes, right? You vote for my bill, I'll support your other bill. And so therefore, if there's any political advantage to a vote that is cast without much political disadvantage, then they do that horse trading. And that lack of concerted effort on the part of the church to object to the divorce bill in the House was what led many of those congressmen to vote the way they did. Afterwards, in the after damage control, the damage control, again, my friends tell me, what they were saying was, well, we thought it was okay with the church. We thought it was okay with the bishops because there was not much noise in the wind up to that vote. So that's what happened. Now, here's my takeaway from that. Why is it that the divorce bill keeps on being filed ever since the 1990s? The first time I appeared in the Senate in a committee hearing, Johnny Ponce Enrile was still very active. I still remember the day when he told me, "Father, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating for divorce. I'm very happy with my wife, Christina, but I'm just here to pick your brains," he said. I always say, when somebody tells me something like that, deep inside, I always say immediately, "Good luck to you." You know, I was going to pick my brains. Father, he said, if marriage is a contract, then shouldn't it be rescindable by mutual consent like any other contract if there's mutual consent? And of course, he failed to, at that particular moment, to understand a very fundamental property of marriage as a contract. Yes, it's a contract. It comes about in a contractual way. But the very prestation of the contract, the object which is being negotiated and agreed upon, includes in it a clause on rescindability. And that's what we'll have to see now. That by its very nature, therefore, what one is contracting himself in that contract is that this contract will not be rescindable. It's a contract, therefore. Nevertheless, that pretension, I'm using this term in a very juridic sense, that pretension behind the proponents of the divorce bill is valid. And that's the reason why it keeps on getting filed and refiled and refiled. And what is that? First, the cases of irreparably broken marriages. For example, because of abandonment or spousal abuse, because that's real. There are really unions, there are really quote unquote italics marriages like that in the Philippines. Problematic, dysfunctional, or perhaps even irreparably broken already because they're already apart. Italics marriages. I call them italics marriages because later on in the discourse, you will see that they're not really marriages, but rather the fiction of marriage that came about because it took place in a juridic way. There were witnesses, proper form was observed, it was expressed in public with the proper right, and so it would seem like there was a marriage. Now it's broken. Why? Because precisely there was a defect from the very beginning, and we're going to explain that in a short while. And the second thing that's often foisted on the hapless public upon us by the proponents of divorce is to make an appeal to freedom. The argument being, okay, if you don't like divorce, so don't get divorced. Nobody's forcing you to get divorced. But please don't deny the freedom of other people, the freedom of choice of those in unhappy unions to dissolve their marriage and perhaps even have another chance at a happy one, a happier one afterwards. Now we have to expose the fallacy of these two arguments. First, by showing that the case of irreparably broken marriages, many times, as in many times, would be because they were not really marriages in the first place. The reason why they didn't work, the reason why they're problematic was because there was something lacking. There was a defect from the very beginning. You know, I like cooking, right? And it's not that I cook all the time. I do it as a hobby. Sometimes maybe once every week or once in 2 weeks, or sometimes even less, because you can imagine how busy a priest would be. But I often cite this example. Imagine if you are presented with a kare-kare, no, which is in Filipino cuisine, to my mind, is the most sophisticated Filipino dish. which is native Filipino, because all the rest are either Chinese, Thai, or Spanish, or whatever fusions. But the kare-kare is very, very Filipino. No? Imagine you're presented with a kare-kare, and the sauce is fantastic, the color is just right. But then when you dig into it, you realize that the buntot is not a buntot, but rather a piece of garden hose. And then you wonder, okay, there's no amount of sauce, there's no amount of color, there's no amount of taste that will make this kare-kare, because this is not oxtail. Or even put it another way, nowadays there are plenty. You go to restaurants and you'll find beef kare-kare, they will say, or what do you call that? Seafood kare-kare. Well, okay, fine. So they have reduced kare-kare to a way of flavoring, a way of cooking, but that changes the whole idea. Kare-kare has it's a traditional dish. It has a specific composition, the proteins of which should be buntot, oxtail, and tripe. If you're going to put some beef into it, well, okay, that's a recent invention, but the traditional dish of kare-kare will have to have oxtail and tripe. And if it doesn't have that, then it's not kare-kare anymore. You can invent another name, but that's adjusting it. And that's what happens with marriage as well. Marriage has a specific content, and we're going to see that closely. And so therefore, if it's not that, if it doesn't have that content, then it's not a marriage. So what was it then? It's a fiction of marriage. And it's a job of the court, the competent tribunal, to declare it as such. Note, this is not an annulment. Definitely it's not a divorce, because there's nothing to annul and there's nothing to divorce, but rather it's a declaration that marriage never existed here. So what you have is a fiction of marriage. Now, of course, in order to do something like that, nobody can do that unilaterally and just claim, I think my marriage was invalid. No, and that's where the juridic structure comes in. In order for a reality, no matter how convincing it might be, no matter how personally convicted we might be about that reality or convinced about that reality, if we're going to make it stand in court, make it stand in the juridic matrix, in the juridic system, it must have what I am fond of calling a juridic structure. It must be provable in court. It must stand muster because it has been articulated in specific laws which are exigible. There's a word. You look it up in the dictionary, that exists. In Spanish, of course, that's a very normal word, exigible. But it's only recently that I discovered that it exists in English, exigible, which means demandable. You can demand it. That's what makes something juridic, until something can be demanded, can be enforced, can be precisely, is exigible, because it was established in a norm, it was articulated in its composition, in its expression, it's in its registration. Unless it can be that, then it may be real. In the same way that you and I were very real, you're very real. But unless you have a birth certificate, unless you have a residence, unless you, I don't know, all kinds of documentation, then you don't exist. The same way with your actuations. You can only act a certain way. Oh, sure, you can do whatever you want, but it won't have any legal standing or any juridic importance or constancy unless it's done according to law, because we're living in a state of law and we're not in the wild. Now, the same thing happens with marriage, that the content of marriage is established. So therefore, if somebody gets married and any one of those ingredients are not there, like the kare-kare without the buntot or without the tripe, then it's not kare-kare, it's not marriage. And it will have to be for the expert to declare, no, this is not kare-kare. And if you join a culinary contest with that, then you will be disqualified because you have invented something which does not follow the canons of cooking kare-kare, etc. And then as far as the second objection is concerned, the freedom of choice. Look at this. I hope you took your coffee after lunch because I'm demanding a lot of intellectual, shall we say, perspicacity here, sharpness. A divorce law will not only affect those marriages which want a divorce. A divorce law affects all marriages because it changes the definition of marriage to something which cannot be dissolved to something which can be dissolved. So even if a person, your own marriage, for example, even if you're you're very solid in your marriage, by the fact of a divorce bill, the quality of your marriage is undermined, is watered down, because now it can be impugned. Hopefully nobody impugns it, that neither of you will impugn it, but it's already impugnable, unlike before when it couldn't be impugned. So that's the fallacy of that argument of freedom of choice. Because the law does not behave that way. A divorce bill is all encompassing. It affects everyone, not just those marriages which will be assailed or what do you call this, in which rather the spouses would want a divorce. All marriages will be hitherto or henceforth divorceable, as we can say, as I might say. Now let's move on. What do we do with this bill? The first thing we need to address is to remove the red herring. The divorce bill is already dead, right? Right now in this particular Congress. Okay, it passed Congress, but it can't possibly pass the Senate. It's dead on the water. Why? Why not? Well, because it's very divisive. We're just a year away from elections, and nobody's going to touch that and risk supporting it and getting it passed, but then losing the elections next year because that's a very unpopular bill for half of the population or something like that. So that's dead on the water. But that's not my point. The point is, why do we have to waste time every year in this exercise? As I said, nowadays, if somebody invites me to Congress, and I got invited, and also in the Senate, I never go anymore because I really see it's a waste of time. They're not up to an intelligent discussion anyway. They don't give you enough airtime. They don't read the documents, and there's no way of understanding these issues by executive summaries. You have to go a little bit deeper into it. So it's a waste of time. But it's time that we do waste every year, every time this is filed. So what I'd like to happen in this coalition is to attack this in such a way that it can never be filed again. And the first step is this red herring, is to show it once and for all that this is illegal. This is anti-constitutional. There's a reason why when it was passed and a lot of people got nervous. Me, I have never been nervous with this thing because even if it passes in the Senate, it can be assailed for unconstitutionality and the Supreme Court will most probably rule against it. But again, it's going to be a waste, an awful waste of time in that exercise. God knows there's so many other issues that this country has that need to be addressed rather than this stupidity which is called the divorce bill. And I don't mind calling it stupidity because that's what it is. You have to call things by their name. So why is it illegal? First, the Philippine Constitution, Article 15, Section 2, describes marriage as an inviolable social institution. Problem many times with people is they're nominalists. Okay, they change the content of concepts, the content even of names, of nouns, to their own liking. There are 3 words there, which are constitutional in nature, meaning to say untouchable because they're in the Constitution, unless you make a constitutional amendment, which is, in Spanish, we would call it palabras mayores, son, what do you call these, major things. It's not a small thing to make a constitutional amendment. And what are these? Inviolable social institution. 3 words. First is the word institution. Let's not be careless about the use of the word institution. When you say that something is an institution, for those of you who are more, shall we say, educated in English, you know, it's something, when something is an institution, he is an institution in college, or he's an institution in the movie, and in the movie industry, or he is an institution in the Senate. It's been there since the Velociraptors, etc. Like that meme once showed my good friend, you know, because it's been there so long. An institution comes from the Latin word instituere, to be instituted. An institution is something given, instituted by somebody else, so therefore it's not anymore subject to normal human commerce or business or negotiation. It's there. It's a given. It's established. Not that it's instituted in stone. Of course, it can be changed, but not easily, like the Philippine Constitution is. You don't just change the Constitution, you know. So it's an institution. Now, what kind of an institution is it? It's a natural institution. That's even a stronger word. It's not an institution that was put up by the raising of hands, like what happens with the Constitution of the Philippines, the Malolos Convention, etc., by a constitutional convention. No, it's an institution which is given by nature itself. It's the nature of things to be like that. We're not the author of human nature. We're not the author of nature in itself. It's something given. It was put there by the creator. The problem with our age is precisely this postmodernism, where people are doubt everything. At first blush, it seems like a humility to doubt. I'm not so sure. I'm not sure. No, not to be sure is a cover up for not wanting to abide by what has been established. So in other words, to put skepticism, intellectual skepticism, to be able to change concepts and the contents of concepts because we don't want things to be the way they are. Example, I'm going to touch something which will raise, in Spanish again, we say, levanta ampollas, no, which will raise boils. In Tagalog, we would say, nakaka-nosebleed, you know. Here, we're more decent, we say nosebleed. The Spaniards would say, nakakatubo ng pigsa sa puwet, no? So that's what levantar ampollas means, you know. At least we're more delicate. We just say, nosebleed, no? Which is, and here's the thing that I will raise, all the business of the LGBTQ, the gender problem. Pardon the aside, but it illustrates the point very well. First of all, they tried to come up with the SOGI bill, making use of the entry point of protecting those with gender confusion, gender problems, appealing to their human rights, which, by the way, is correct, because everybody has a human right as human beings. But for that to segue into defining homosexual rights, transgender rights, that's a different story. You have a right to that as a human being. You don't have a right to that as a homosexual. Because there's no such thing as a homosexual rights in their homosexuality for the simple reason that homosexuality is an aberration, is an abnormality. What is normal is to be man, woman. And the gender that follows each one automatically is masculine, feminine. Gender is not a matter of choice. It's a matter of sex. And we are sex, so we're also gendered. However, since gender is developed in education, in upbringing, it can admit of abnormalities. Nobody can be abnormally male. If you're XX, you're female. If you're XY in your chromosome, you're male. Of course, the genetic material that will follow that, the physiological, or I would say the hormonal content of that, can admit of variations. And that's the reason why you have certain women with more masculine characteristics. They grow mustache and they're very muscular, but they're still women. Or men who are a little bit more effeminate in their structure, but the behavior that will follow it, that's a matter of choice. No matter how physically, shall we say, unmasculine I may be, physically feminine I may be, lalampa-lampa, payat, balingkinitan, or something, I can still choose to act in a masculine way. It's a matter of choice. And that's what happens with these things. Now, segue that to the nature of marriage. Marriage has an intrinsic nature. Is that union between a man and a woman, which the law can only reflect, can only, shall we say, manifest in the juridic matrix of a society, articulate in laws, but following it, not going against it. Because when a law goes against the nature of things, by that very fact, it becomes irrational. And by that very fact, it loses its, shall we say, its right or its claim to exigibility. You cannot demand something that goes against nature. On the contrary, one is even obliged to disobey a law that goes against nature. But that precisely is the problem. We're living in an age where people doubt the very notion of nature. We're living in a civilization, the post-Christian era, the post-modernistic age, which really is just a rehash of medieval errors of nominalism of William of Ockham, that will later went on to René Descartes and Kant and all the romantics of the 18th and 19th centuries, to the modernism which was condemned by Pope Pius X in the beginning of the 20th century, only to rise up, rear up its ugly head again after the Second Vatican Council in the post-conciliar crisis. And this is the thing that we have right now. People hindi magkamayaw, no? The other day, somebody made I got introduced to the notion, it's the first time I heard it, of the so-called Kamala salad, no? This Kamala Harris is very fond of, repeating things and turning them around, and it's like making a salad, no? Makes you think. What did she say? What did she really want to say? It's like a salad of concepts. To which I objected because I said, as I said, I like cooking. A salad is composed of ingredients that are put together. I mean, good ingredients that are put together by a fantastic sauce or dressing that binds the whole thing into a unity. In the case of Kamala Harris, what she has are bad ingredients and then a very bad what they call this binder, that instead of having a salad, a nice salad, what you have there is a diarrhea of sorts, no? It's a mental diarrhea rather than a salad, a beautiful salad, no? Imagine if you make a halo-halo. Halo-halo is one of our national desserts, right? I mean, who doesn't love a halo-halo? But imagine if you make a halo-halo and the compositions will be something very sour, right? Like sampalok, unsweetened, and then something really odd in taste, like what? Like okra, and something still other in taste, like ampalaya. And then you put all of that together with nice ice, and then the dressing that you put into it is suka. So what's going to do with it? It's not going to be, yeah, it's a halo-halo, but halo-halo for making you sick more than anything else. And that's what happens with this red herring. So first, the Constitution says that we have the principle of the statutory construction, which says that clear and unequivocal language must be interpreted literally. Now, the Constitution's framing of marriage as an inviolable, explicit as inviolable rather, explicitly excludes provisions for divorce. So it's an inviolable social institution. So that's very clear. So if you're going to institute divorce, then you're violating it. Second, legislative actions reinforce this interpretation. The Family Code of the Philippines, which provides for legal separation, annulment, and declaration of nullity, excludes divorce. So in other words, even in the organic law regarding marriage and family, because that's what the family code is, it's an organic law. You know, there's a hierarchy of laws. You have the Constitution, and then you have big laws that are almost as constitutional as the Constitution. And one of that precisely is the family code. It's the organic law regarding marriage and family. It contains annulment, declaration of nullity, and separation, but doesn't include divorce. So therefore, if you're going to institute divorce, you're going to violate the family code, aside from violating the Constitution. And no normal legislation should be able to do that. Is it possible to do that? Yes, but you have to change the family code and you'll have to change the Constitution first. Otherwise, that law will be against the family code and against the Constitution. Therefore, marriage's defined inviolability inherently prohibits the legalization of divorce without a constitutional amendment. His position not only respects the literal interpretation of the Constitution, but also honors the historical and cultural ethos of the Filipino people. But we go back to the social reality of irreparably broken unions, which, as I said, is really the driving force behind the growing acceptance of the divorce bill among the legislators and even among the public. The reality of dysfunctional and irreparably broken unions. Note, I used the word unions. Earlier, I used the word marriage, but I wanted to put it in italics because in the preponderant majority of such cases, the reason for the marital breakdown is a serious defect in that marriage from the start, resulting in a veritable fiction of marriage. What is needed, therefore, more than a divorce law, is a juridical mechanism for the declaration of nullity of such marriages. Not a divorce law, which would affect all marriages, but laws which will make the declaration of nullity more efficient, more, shall we say, accessible, more or smoother in its acquisition. That will only affect, therefore, the specific dysfunctional or irreparably broken unions. Now, from that introduction, let's get down to deeper realities, how to think about marriage and its juridic structure. And what I'm going to show in the next 10 minutes is that marriage is nothing but the institutional expression of conjugal love. As such, it must respect the institutional content of conjugal love, which means the ends of marriage, the natural ends of marriage, and two, the essential properties of marriage. Those properties that follow if those ends are accepted. Let's try to understand this. Any action is for an end. That's a philosophical principle. Actiones sunt propter finem. Things are the way they are because of the finality for which they are. So true is this that in the more, shall we say, primitive languages like Tagalog, for example, Filipino. Filipino is primitive, of course it is. No, it's a very simple language. If you want a sophisticated language, think of Spanish, French, and all of those, Italian. More sophisticated still, think of Latin. More sophisticated still, think of Greek. And then there's a sophisticated language. But Filipino is quite simple. That in the more simple languages, more primitive languages, the names reflect the finality. That's why you call a bench or rather a stool an upuan. You say, what is an upuan? Well, that's something where you sit on, or salumpwit, which is even more graphic, right? Higaan, silid hapunan, or whatever, no? So things like those. Because they explain the end for which it is. Now, the fundamental reality of marriage is conjugal love. You will recall how when the RH bill was still a bill, there was an awful lot of objection to it from the Episcopal Conference, from the CVCP. What was the objection to the RH bill? The most important objection to the RH bill was the reduction of marriage through sexual education to sex. Meaning to say, instead of teaching reproductive rights or conjugal love as what's behind all of that, what was going to be taught in all those years of sex education was sex. And since you can only talk so much about sex, because, you think about it, what can you talk about sex? Animals engage in sex without even being taught about it. Something instinctive. And yet you're going to teach it for 6 years, because that's what it is right now in the K-12 program. It's being taught for 6 years, perhaps even 8. So what content will you put that in the sex education? What's put into it rather are the aberrations of sexual behavior, contraception, and all the abnormalities, etc., which children don't need to know about. And nobody talks about the basic reality, which is conjugal love. Now, what is conjugal love? That's the fundamental reality underlying marriage and family. Conjugal love is the mutual self-giving and acceptance of a man and a woman in the totality of their personhood, meaning to say, as man and as woman. Because come to think of it, you don't see human beings walking around. What you see are male humans and female humans. That we are sexed. Like the rest of the animal kingdom, they are sexed. It is in the exercise of our sexuality. I'm not talking about genital sexuality, but being man, being woman, the self-giving. I give myself as a man to this woman who will accept me in her femininity, accept my masculinity. Now, that total self-giving is aimed at the perfection of that personhood in all its dimensions. That's what conjugal love is. There are many other kinds of love. Love of friendship, for example. In the love of friendship, what do you have? Two people giving themselves to each other for the perfection of the other as a person, or perhaps it's even more limited. Look at the friendship between buddies, Navy SEALs in a given squad or platoon. They're giving themselves in each other, not as human beings, but as elements of a Navy's SEAL platoon, meaning to say, as soldiers, as special warriors, etc., and they all have their positions within that squad. One is a sharpshooter, the other one is like this, the other one's like that. But when the self-giving and acceptance is as a man and as a woman in the totality of their personhood as masculine and feminine, then that's what you call conjugal love. And what is the finality of that? Like any other friendship, the perfection of the parties, of the spouses. Not the perfection as human beings only, but the perfection as man and as woman. Which contains, because when two people give themselves to each other sexually, that openness to reproduction, procreation actually in our sense, in our case, rather, because we don't just reproduce, we procreate. We allow God to create a new soul, a new human being who is a spiritual being, a person. And that's the reason why openness to life belongs to the finality of marriage. It's not just the mutual perfection of the spouses, it's also the procreation and bringing of children, which, as you know very well, will depend on the organism, meaning to say, love, the only thing that love demands is openness to it, not actual reproduction, because that will depend on the biological factors. Sometimes that may fail, but in principle, they're open to it. And that's the reason why if a person is not open to reproduction, it's contraceptive. Therefore, well, there's no conjugal love. And that's something that we need to explain time and again, because many times people confuse conjugal love with sex attraction, with some kind of a chemistry between the two sexes. Well, okay, that's part of it, but that's not it. Because that kind of excitement, that kind of chemistry may disappear sooner or later. But conjugal love must remain if it's conjugal love, because conjugal love is an act of the will, and the will is always free, regardless of the passions or of the emotions that may come with it. And that's the reason why in conjugal love, remember your spousal vows, for richer or for poorer, in health, sickness, or in health. And here's the most important, for better or for worse. Many times people forget this. Love does not end just because the other party got worse. Because there's a possibility somebody might get worse. Sometimes without their will, somebody got sick, somebody got insane, fell into Parkinson or even Alzheimer's, and begins to lose their mind. Sometimes it's willful. Like, I don't know, somebody starts being unfaithful, falls into gambling and all kinds of vices. For as long as those things happen afterwards, they do not affect the coming about of the marriage. That marriage is valid. And in principle, the innocent party committed himself or herself to remain in that union because he wanted to. If somebody, by the way, is not ready to do that, and if you can prove that a posteriori that somebody was not willing to do that, that's a ground for declaration of nullity. It's exclusion of the essential properties of marriage. So if somebody got married, but only meant only for better, not for worse, or never mind for in richer or poorer, I'm willing to get poorer, or in sickness and in health, and that's okay if somebody gets sick. But what if he gets worse? I don't accept that. Then you didn't get married. Already you're seeing the tip of the iceberg. That many problems in marriage are because of this. That people got married, they were not really thinking of a marriage that way. So if that marriage fell apart because they were not ready really for worse part, divorce is not the answer. Declaration of nullity is. Because if you can prove that, and here's where the cookie crumbles, because in civil law, there are no laws, there are no, shall we say, juridical instruments to prove that. But in canon law, there is. So it's a matter of adapting those provisions that will show that, in fact, at the time of the marriage, one was reserving certain essential qualities of marriage or excluding certain essential qualities of marriage, in which case the tribunal can say that that marriage is invalid from the start. We need to annul it, because annulment is really equivalent to divorce, but we have to declare that it was null. So conjugal love, therefore, is the mutual self-giving and acceptance of a man and a woman in the totality of their personhood, as man and as woman, aim at the perfection of that personhood in all its dimensions. Marriage is nothing but the institutional expression of conjugal love. and family is a natural fruit of conjugal love.